So
Sawa Banane family, we see you, we honor you, and we value you. Your gifts, along with God's grace, allow us to persevere, to mentor, and prepare new leaders as we co-create for future generations. The Proctor Conference is where future meets legacy. We are committed to the forward crusade of faith, equity, and reparatory justice, nationally and globally. We are the place where Ubuntu becomes reality. Your gifts to the Legacy Campaign enables our success, our sustainability, and secures the future. With vision, by faith, and through action, we are the Proctor Conference.
I'm so grateful that there is in this world something called the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. You've been on the wall doing the work. Sister Iva Carruthers and so many others, you represent the best of our faith. You represent the faith of the Black church, the conscience of the American churches. Thank you for the work that you do.
Family, the time has come to work the roots. The roots of Samuel DeWitt Proctor, Gardner C. Taylor, Pauli Murray, Bayard Rustin, and the list continues. As the mission of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference continues to shape our ethos and worldview. Join us today by committing an annual, one-time, or recurring gift to the SDPC Legacy Campaign. We pray that you and your loved ones have been and will remain the benefactors of God's grace and mercy. Thank you.
Welcome to Rainbow Table Talk, RTT. And this evening, we're going to have a conversation on the stigmatization and the bias among and within Black trans, Black queer, and Black faith community, which is a lot to talk about. We got a lot to talk about this evening. And so we're going to go around and introduce yourselves. We'll start with Dr. Lissette, Reverend Dr. Lissette. Let's start with her this evening.
This evening, well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be in virtual space talking about such an ongoing and persistent intersection in what it means for us to be faithful folks and folks that are making our communities and our spiritual spaces as inclusive and expansive and loving as possible. I am the pastor of Restoration Fellowship, RVA, in Richmond, Virginia. I'm also the founder and CEO of Will You Be Whole, where I talk sex and faith with Black women and LGBTQ folks. I am also the co-founder of Virginia's first ever Black Pride LGBTQ Festival Weekend. 5th year this year, July 13th to the 17th. So bring all of these identities as activists, as a member of the community, as a bisexual identified woman, and as a pastor to this conversation. And I look forward to our engagement. And I will pass it to Reverend Esty.
Good evening, everyone. I am Reverend Eolosha Esty Nina Dillard. I am a West African Orisha priest, as well as a minister, and doing the work in the Christian church and on the African traditional front. I am the owner and founder of Endless Spiritual Consulting, where I offer spiritual coaching, sexuality coaching, ritual work, and ancestral connection work for Black folks. And I also help run a sex conference here in Atlanta and do a lot of work for queer Black folks on the journey. Yeah. Grief work, I do a lot of grief work too.
Interesting, wonderful work. And Reverend Perry, Washington.
Hello, everyone. I'm Perry Katahali, Washington. I am here by way of Proctor. I work with Mrs. J.I. committee and also work within my ministry life at the at the intersections of faith, sexuality, and Black liberation theologies. And so I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation and very excited to just hear from you brilliant women and also Dr. Mike as we really try to really deal with some very important issues I think that is facing the church today and the world writ large.
Wonderful. Welcome. Yes. So I'm my Reverend Dr. Michael Lee. I'm Dr. Mike. I'm part of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference family, and I'm part of on the committee as well for the Mrs. J.I., the Mary Rustin Social Justice Institute, which is involved with Rainbow Table Talk as well as Proctor. And we're continuing to have these conversations. I've been doing some work. We're launching off from Proctor Pride Prayer-demic, which occurred in June of 2021, where we had a month-long lineup of LGBTQIA, the alphabet mafia, as somebody said, LGBTQIA ministers and ministers of music and preachers who did a month-long of prayer reflections. And it was a really exciting time for the Proctor family. And as out of that, we developed, reopened the Mrs. J.I. Institute and developed the Rainbow Table Talk. So this is an ongoing project that happened with, as I talk to Jerry all the time, it happened with a simple DM. And a simple DM. What about us? And now this is happening. This is happening. And so as welcome you all here this evening to have a conversation on the stigmatization. And I wanted to open up. I had a particular incident at a Bible study, and it was a really interesting conversation. It wasn't about sexuality at all. So I don't know where this came from. But I suspect that the conversation was going to the left and this individual wasn't happy where this was going, or just tried to say something. And she said, I have nothing against everybody. I don't judge anybody. People do what they want to do. And, I don't judge alcoholics, drug addicts, or homosexuals. And they do what they do because they like what they do. And I was like, what just happened here? So I was like, all right, number one, 2022, we're still using the word homosexuals. Okay, that's number one. And number two, I just found out she was not only patronizing, but she was violent. It was a violent rhetoric. It was violent rhetoric and violent categorization. But because it came from left field, it wasn't part of the conversation. I don't know what struck the nerve to have this. And so here we are. Here I have been through all this rites of passage and all this initiation processes and understanding Orishas and understanding and rereading the Bible. And I got what? So because it wasn't the topic of the conversations, I just turned my camera off. I was like, I just turned my camera off. So, we're still having to explain ourselves. We're still having to having these conversations that are problematic. And it wasn't the space. It wasn't the time, wasn't the space, but I just really could have said, well, that was violent. But, majority of people on there were not that way. So I don't know, what was going on. I mean, that wasn't the topic of conversation, but I clearly see that there's still conversations that need to take place. So I wanted y'all to, what do we think about that? What do we think about particularly the work that we've done? And in facing this type of language and facing these incidences, not only without the community, within the community and our faith-based communities. So what's your take on that? You're muted. Somebody's muted. All y'all are muted. This is a conversation. Unmute yourself. Yes, right. Yay, right.
Okay, I'll jump in and just kind of say quickly, I think there always has to be space for conversation, but I also think there has to be some kind of guidelines, ground rules, and ways of engagement, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think as we grow as a community, we have to find ways to have allies, to have structures, to have systems in place. Because even I had the same reaction you did, Dr. Mike, of like, oh, that's the language we use. Oh, okay, just at hearing you recount it. So I think sometimes it's helpful to just have somebody who can say, hey, this isn't the conversation, but let me send you a private invitation and just have an offsite conversation of, here's a good starting place. Here's a good framework. And here's why this is the framework that we're talking about. Because I think just much like, we need some folks to have some white conference, we also need some folks to have straight conference.
Yes.
Right. And we, so and yeah, like it's got to be a straight people meeting at the Black conference. Please.
I am tickled. I am tickled. I'm tickled because I don't think I've ever quite heard that articulation, but hearing it is like, yes, like my bones, my whole being was like, that's exactly what needs to happen. Because I think what struck me about the story is what happened to her, what triggered her. Right? And that her triggering then resulted in this eruption over the whole community that was there, right? Mm-hmm. And like the idea of addressing stigma within our communities often is about like addressing personal traumas and hurts that just end up really falling out on folks where everybody is like, wait a minute.
Wait, what?
What just happened here, right? And depending on your level of allyship, of advocacy, of participation, of membership within community, who are your chosen family, you're gonna have a spectrum of responses, right? So part of our responsibility, I believe, as clergy leaders, as advocates, activists, right, is to like, okay, one, identify our location, and then two, identify how can we help other folks get to a point where, like Reverend Esty said, we got a conference for you. We got
right. come on in to this conference. Come on into this conference.
Exactly.
But I want to say this is not the first time, but she was triggered. But she wasn't triggered by she was triggered by the fact that this was a conversation with a very, progressive audience, and she's not. And so it was, I had a conversation with a pastor a long time ago that some of these, particularly these white evangelical Christians, will go into a Black church and say three things. First, they'll say Jesus. Then they'll make a comment about homosexuality. But they first said Jesus, make a comment about homosexuality, and then say amen. Those are the three things that will, and then, or hide it in between. So it wasn't the conversation. I just don't know where it just went left. And I realized that we're the Bible study was far more progressive than she was. And so she had to, drop something. It triggered her. The progressive conversation triggered her. And I believe, I'm not sure, I can't affirm, but I think she had a Kojic background. And I think, she wasn't in the Kojic Bible study. I'll just say that.
Wow. I think that that there is this resistance that happens when people hear, I like to say, the gospel for the first time.
Wow.
When they hear the truth of who God is and hear the truth of the words without the stigmas, without the sort of demonization of certain groups of the marginalized, right? Without those things, to hear it through new ears always unsettles one's spirit. And I think how one channels that energy, whether that be towards growth, because one of my former professors, Dr. Parker, would say growth causes friction. So whether that's directing that friction towards growth or directing it towards complacency, one has an opportunity to grow. But also on the person who is marginalized that is sitting in that conversation. I think so. When I was hearing you talking, I heard you say, now is not the time. For me, it kept coming up. It's never the time, right? It's never a time where it is acceptable to have a space that a person is allowed to spew and or to just bleed on the people, essentially what it sounds like, right?
Yes, I think that's what. Yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's how.
yeah.
That's exactly how it just came across. I was like, but I was like, but if I could see if the foundation was the conversation. This was the conversation. They said this. I was like, okay, but it was just it was just completely out of left field. I was, but but this is the second time. This first time, I did have a very visceral reaction to what was said, and I was given an opportunity to state some of the terms and some of the stuff. And so I was able to do it. So it's not like this, but again, it was something triggered her in that conversation that she went left, she went right, totally right. And it wasn't even a conversation about it. So I was able to do it, but I was just like, I need to approach this a little bit differently the next time I'm ever in this Bible study again, and the person's on there, and I'm like, waiting for the trigger, because I didn't trigger the conversation. It was just, like I said, it was something. It was a key word to distract. I felt it was a bit of a distraction from the conversation that was happening. It was something had triggered her in that conversation.
Yeah, I think in many ways, spilling, like bleeding over on the people has, I think, like two effects. On one hand, in that it affects other people, right? Because like if you even think of it as bleeding, right? Like it can touch others and now affect others, and they're now wrestling. Not only they're wrestling with your trauma while holding space, if they have any, for their own lived experience. And then the other part is that every bleeding needs a cleanup, right? Every spill, someone must come back to try to mend the hurt that has been caused. And for me, that is that sort of stopping at some point to say, okay, the bleeding must stop. We need to fix this situation here so that there's not too much transference, if you will.
And I think that, what do you think, Reverend?
I was just gonna jump in on this part to add that I think it's important also to always have space for healing, even if it's just in the naming or the acknowledgement of it, because as African descended folks, we have collective communal trauma around sexuality just in the naming of it, right? Because that is a trigger that is ancestral, that is embodied, that is pervasive for our collective experience, right? So even, for us, some of us need to go to CIS conference, to the CIS people meet, you know what I'm saying? Because we all are carrying these privileges and the ways that we have reinscribed that trauma, and it has to be named, it has to be dealt with. And so I just often find that even if it's a workshop or something like that I'm leading, or a teaching that I'm doing, it's always important for me to even just take a moment to acknowledge that, hey, if there's something here that is just way too different, or it's too much of a rub, here's a resource, or stay for 5 minutes and let me chat with you, or what I mean? Because I think much to what Reverend Perry just said, it's important that you don't require the traumatized to have to then have space. But I do think because we already automatically have trauma, it's good to have some kind of named, acknowledged space to say, okay, if there is a way that you experience this conversation, even though we might feel lighthearted about it, here's what we have for you. We got a glossary, something, because I think those things help people to know that they can be safe where they are, and can at times, if they have the emotional maturity for it, can at times allow them to go for the resource versus other tactics.
Right.
And I would just want to push that a little further and help us wrestle with how do we equip the people to do that? Because often if you're in a Bible study, right, there is an assumed hierarchy of who the helpers are, right? And then even within the helpers, there's an assumed whose role, whose position, who should have addressed it, right? That's the pastor, like we all know what it means to be in hierarchy, right? And so as a pastor, I find it hard as a pastor to, one, equip the people, and then two, I hate the word empower, but give them the power to step in, right? Build that power within them, because we often, like, if Dr. Mike had that response in this progressive Bible study, there's at least 2 or 3 others who also had the response. And then it becomes this internal dialogue between parishioners and clergy who should or shouldn't intercede, when really, to the point being made, we can all offer, right, tools. We can all offer space at our levels of maturity, but often within our Black faith community specifically, there is such an internal sense of hierarchy of who should or should not step in, right, to do the thing. And so what is our role? What is our responsibility? Not just as, like, I'm coming from a pastoral position, but any of us who are clergy, any of us who are skilled, who are leading ministries, who are lay leaders, right? How do we then give power to one another to be able to be like, we all have the tools available to us, and on any given day, we might be, on our level of healing and being ready, or, having to sit back because we're processing some stuff, but that all of us feel the responsibility of, like, being able to look over or to virtually, like, check in with somebody somehow and be like, all right, I got this, because, all right, Dr. Mike, we know you always step in on this way, or Reverend Perry, let me just step in and do it this way for us. And it feels like a vision that can be fulfilled if our leaders and our healers and the folks that are skilled and equipped, in partnership with kind of the validators within our faith communities, are like, you went to this workshop, you had this trainer come in, we had this person come in, and now we are all equipped, right, to create this space, to co-create this, like, brave, sacred space together. And that is hard, right? That's a vision.
It is, and I also, as we are, within our community, dealing with all these labels and the alphabet mafia, and all these labels. And I was doing a Bible study one time, and I tried to, went from super scholarly to I watered it down. So, but I also realized it was new information. I also realized it can be overwhelming because you're so accustomed to these particular words, this particular dynamics, and I'm coming to you with a whole other story, with a whole other level of labels and a whole other stuff, and so it becomes overwhelming. So you either walk with it or you shut down, right? And so I had a conversation. One of my mentors she either shakes her head, or she just waits for me to say whatever I have to say, or she'll come behind me, because I'll just, occasionally I'll just say what I got to say. And older woman came to me at a conference, and after my workshop, and she said, "Young man, you confused me." And I said, "Did I? Or were you confused before I opened my mouth?" A year later, she remembered the conversation, and she approached me. She says, I was confused before you opened your mouth. You brought truth. You brought ideas that I had not thought of, that I had never heard of. And I was confused. She said, I literally was. You are absolutely right. I was confused before you opened your mouth. So as we're dealing with the labels, how do we expect other people, other communities to deal with the variety of labels? And don't even talk about a Reverend here. Let's not have the conversation about the African spiritual part, the African Yoruba spiritual part. I mean, I just found about Oshumare last June. So I am far behind. So how do we, we have with now that I'm in that level of conversation with the Orishas and all that stuff, where do we go with that? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that the African constructs offer us a great deal that can help inform and even support biblical interpretation to give us additional tools, right? And so I think, much to what I was saying earlier about just having some ground rules, I think, much to a similar concept, we are culturally expected to engage in a particular way. And I think some of what we have to do around stigma is to learn to engage differently, right, and to learn to talk to each other differently, and to learn to have conversations differently. Like I think a very benign example is when I cut all my hair off and I went back home, and the way that people even would refer to me at the time, I wasn't out even to myself. So it was no. I know at the time, that's a different conversation, but it was nuanced in that at the time I was straight, right? So they calling me a bull dagger, and I'm like, cause I cut my hair off, right? Like, cause I'm bald headed. I just didn't want to have no problem no more. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't, those were not the places that I was moving through, right? And so just the way that even we have learned to engage around our bodies, around how we see and experience each other, how we talk to each other, how we name things. And so that's a place where I think it's insidious for us as African descended folks, because we've learned to engage in a particular way. And really the root of that engagement is white supremacy, is colonization. It's not us. Right. That's not Blackness. That's not Africanness. And so I think even in Pan-African communities and in African traditional religious communities, we have integrated some of these experiences theologically that don't necessarily reflect the origin. So I actually think African spirituality offers us a great deal to help inform and interpret and understand even the Bible as a traditional African text, because it is. We're talking about people in North Africa and ethnic stories of an oral tradition, which how is that any different from Ifa or, the Akan tradition or the Ewe tradition or the ancient traditions of the Dahomey or any of the other many ethnic groups that I could name,
Anybody else? What's going on? Anybody else? What are you thinking? What are you thinking, Reverend Perry? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? I see you thinking. What are you thinking?
One of the things I think that I was considering earlier when you brought up the situation with the lady, and what Reverend Essie said earlier is, sort of this idea of how do we hold space for those whereby which this is new information, right? While also creating healthy boundaries. And I think this goes back also to Dr. Lasses's question about, sort of how do we bring this to our churches or our faith spaces and actually kind of, bring this to the people. And sort of, I know that's something that I've always wrestled with. And even with my family, I have this kind of, I think, a little bit more of a tolerance, if you will, for disdain, because for me, there's a space, I think that Reverend Essie called it, a space for healing, right? Or the space for, this is new information, which may be uncomfortable. Let me allow it to sit, right? And maybe I think it's because of the ways in which I remember when this was new to me, how it was uncomfortable for me. Oh, yeah. Even as someone who knew I had these feelings, desires, identity that I knew, for me, I refused to call outwardly a sin, even though internally I warred spiritually with it. I remember one day it's going on like a 50-day fast for this as a in middle school. And so it was, asking God to really take this away. I grew up in this, very Pentecostal Southern home. And so for me, I was using the tools that the church told me I had. And so I remember sort of at the end of this, asking God to really take it out and hearing this voice say, take what out and why, right? And so even as this sort of young child, at that point, it changed how I prayed, and I stopped praying that, but didn't really know what to say. And then even going to Morehouse and hearing sort of, if you will, giving the freedom papers, giving the spiritual freedom papers to to be you. It's okay.
Right.
But
Be
still,
you. What?
but still saying this, no, because I can, it's that kind of I think
Be you,
very
but don't be you.
conservative tradition, right? Of going back to the text. I'm even in my liberation theology, I'm very closely tied to the text, even, right? And so for me, I couldn't, even with the new knowledge I had, I couldn't let go of it in different ways. But it was through ritual, through Nduga and Nzinga and other sort of close communities where I think I was able to walk in that a little bit more boldly with different tools than what the church gave in order to really kind of walk in that. But there's always a space sometimes that I give others to really kind of deal with the newfound, I don't want to call it gospel, but this new message one is hearing, right? This newness that one is hearing that they may not be accustomed to. So how to, sort of giving grace, but also like go back to Reverend's first point, how do we create boundaries within that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. How do we create boundaries in that? I think that what Mrs. J.I. is planning is to have more teach-ins and do more structural teaching, because it is an advisory board for the entire body of the Samuel W. Proctor Conference. So we have to learn to engage in different communities, even though, where it's not a fight like in other organizations, but it is a space where there has to be teaching, because one of the comments that I heard that came out of the Proctor Pride pandemic was, I'm with everything, but the marriage thing is a problem for me. And I'm like, well, let's have that, I was like, really? And I was like, but, when I had, who is this particular person having a conversation with? Because if you're having a conversation with that community, because marriage is on the list, but marriage is not the top of the list. So healthcare is at the top of the list. Gun violence is white supremacy is at the top of the list. So we have the at least top six are exactly the same. The top 6 items on our agenda are exactly the same. So how do you think marriage for us how are you having this conversation? How do we get away from that conversation and really dealing with the health disparities in our community, HIV/AIDS? I was just at a conference the other day. It was based in Houston, Texas. And what I did not know was about PrEP. What I did not know was the fact that although 86% of those who are eligible for a PrEP don't even know about it, don't take it, and is really, the numbers are low. And also extending that coverage to women to add a PrEP as a tool of empowerment for women as they engage in relationships, right? That taking care of your own health first and not relying on other people. So so one of the things, how do you have these conversations in faith-based communities? And one of the things was that it's about health. It's about community health. Then you put it all into community health because diabetes is high, all these other things. So even in our conversation about sexuality, and the stigmatization, how do we engage in these conversations for people to understand that, well, number one, we're in the community, we're in the community, we're part of the community, we're here. How do we do that? One of the things one of the things I learned from the documentary on the Black church experience, which Henry Louis Gates was, and of course, it was, who was it? It was Henry Louis Gates and Kelly Brown Douglas. And I was shocked, even though I knew it, I was shocked that they actually said it, that there wasn't for Black gay men and Black women, there would be no Black church. No, right? And yet those communities are oppressed within the Black church. Let's have that conversation. No, y'all don't have to stay muted. Y'all engage in the conversation. Come on.
I didn't
some
want
back and
it.
forth.
I didn't want
Just
the
raise your
men-
hand. I was like,
I
okay,
didn't
go
want
ahead.
to start talking and it looked like the men were taking over the conversation.
Oh, no, I think, I was just gonna
Oh,
jump in and say, I wasn't thinking that. I was gonna throw this kind of trouble the waters a little bit, because I think part of the wrestle is for some of us that are in the community or have been doing this work for any amount of time, like even if it's just 6 months, right? We have to figure out where our commitment is to being in the one-on-one conversation. I feel like that has to be, since we are committed to our Black faith communities, since we are committed to creating this expansive space, right, within traditions that we are still holding on to, that we believe in, that we can hybridize in all kinds of creative ways, then also we get to say, how many of us are just, we here for the 101, this is what the Lord called us to do, this is what the ancestors did, or this is what the people called us to do. We the 101 people, and
Right.
then we just gonna be the 101 people, because they're never gonna be them people that are like, I'm okay, like the woman in the story you mentioned at the Bible study, the woman you mentioned, Dr. Mike, in the story at the conference, who was like, I was confused, like there's always gonna be those people. Right. And I'm just wondering, like, can we just get a sign? Can Mrs. J.I. just do a global sign up of like all the people that are like, I'm here for all of the people that are ready for the one-on-one conversation, right? Because that ain't all of us.
Let's
Right?
not waste our time.
Some of us got time, some of us don't, Reverend Perry. Some of us are like, talk to me when you get to 201. Like
Right.
You know,
It's true.
It's like, let us honor that there are people who are newly on this journey. And let us also honor the guides who have been with a large portion of the people who are, and then we're ready to maybe journey deeper because we have equipped ourselves differently, or because, we've shifted, but we reach back, we teach some others, then they can do the one-on-one. Or there are some of us that have been doing this a long time, and it's like, I'm committed to the one-on-one, bring in all the new converts, like bring in all the new people, bring in all the confused, bring in the folks that are still saying homosexual, because I still got grace for them, right? I think that has to be clear. And now I'm using the word clear, but I think that we cannot overlook that there is a call to that work, right?
Yeah.
And every call has a level of preparation. And when you are prepared to consistently be in learning space, healing space with folks that are equating trans identity with alcoholism, like, you just got grace. And we say, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. May the Lord God be with you. And we got refreshments for you when you finish your healing work, right? Like,
Your
that's
healing work.
kind of, yeah, you're right. Like, that's what you're called to do. And we're here for community. So I'm wondering also what that looks like, and how do we honor the fact that, like, we are seeking to build these communities where there will always be a flow of 101, 201, 301 and beyond folks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna chime in on the one-on-one part, because for me, a lot of my work is there, but on the other side of it, right? So I want the trans folks who think being trans is like alcoholism. I'm invested in those people. That's the work that I do and that I am called to do, because I think that part is important too. Which is why for me, I'm clear that my boundary is for those in the lived experience. of being queer. And I think that there has to be space for those who have a different capacity for other one-on-one experiences, but we need both of those. So I want to name the other side of it because that's certainly the work that I do. And and corporately, I'm good on the other conversations. But I do think that when you talk about how do we talk about these things in a faith-based space, similar to the paradigm you offered of what folks do in evangelical spaces, I do kind of think we have to start with the divine. I think we have to start with the divine and the ways in which we really are invested in the same thing. Because I think that matters. I think that's important. I need the ancestors and the Holy Ghost. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want both of them.
Right.
So,
exactly.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I want to preach, shout, and pour libation. Right. So I think it's important to create first that just real common authentic connection, because most of the time I think what I have found is that connection will at least create a bridge of communication. Even if we start in different places, and we will still end in different places, but it will at least help us to see one another and to see and engage from that divine sacred place, which I think is the power of ritual, which is a way that, of course, as a ritualist, it for me is integral in how I create those spaces, because it allows us to remember that learning is sacred, and experiencing new theological frameworks, even if that is, can these two women get married? I don't know about that. But that's still a sacred learning, and it's a sacred storytelling and truth telling for those who are living in that experience, and for those who are supporting the exploration of these two experiences together.
Yeah. One of the things that I was going to say, little small thing, is right after Reverend Esty, is not only sort of naming the divine, but naming oneself as divine, right?
Right.
One's queerness as holy, one's queerness as God anointed and God appointed for one's life, and not sort of this difference that God may be okay with, right? But more like, no, this is this divine call, if you will, this divine order to really consider oneself, as Sobunfu Same says, we're the gatekeepers, and really what all comes along with that, and those calls and responsibilities. And so, so how do we, I think the other part to that is just also being able to name one's place in the community and one's identity as already holy.
Yes, absolutely. I think that I think the theological rhetoric that we have been dealing with in a lot of our churches is that there's something wrong with us, period. Not just queer, but something wrong with us, period. Right. And so I need Jesus, I need this in order to be divine, and not recognize you're divine from the very beginning. And I think, it's about exposing ourselves to other spiritual practices. Salbonani, we see you, we feel you, we value you, are important to us. And namaste, the divinity in me salutes the divinity in you. Having this conversation, having these other spiritual look at, we're the only ones that have this. You're nobody until salvation is you walking down the aisle, and so you won't go to hell. So you won't go to hell, and you're not somebody too. I think that the theology is that theology is kind of it's wrong. So I think as Dr. Lissette said, we've always been questioning. You queer and you question from inception. You're queer, questioning comes with it, and I think that our questions and our seek for answers contradict what the rhetoric has been in our communities as people. So now I'm not coming to you as queer, but I'm coming to you, not that I'm coming to you, but I'm coming to you as Black and queer, and I was all right before I came, well, I was all right. I've been all right from the beginning. I don't need to sit at the bench for 3 hours and learn to speak in tongues. I don't need to do all that. It's okay for some people, but I don't need to earn divinity when divinity is already inside me. And I think that's connected to the Gospels. I think that's connected to Jesus. I think we've missed it.
I mean, absolutely, it's connected to the gospel. I think that even when we look at the folks who were close to Jesus, right, they would have been queer to their communities, not sexually, or at least for what is recorded in the text that we're aware of, because you know, I might have some other suggestions, but that's my womanist hermeneutic. I'm a priest, I melt, but that's not that. This ain't that conversation. But even still, right, communally, as far as them being people who were not at the center and who would have been seen as different and set apart from, is actually what we see Jesus subvert. And we understand being set apart as to be powerful in our Christian context, right? So you should understand that on this journey of continuing to grow theologically, we are all learning how the ways that make us beautiful set us apart, and certainly our sexualities, who we choose to engage with, and how, which is far more vast and expansive than even just a spectrum of gayness, or however one might want to term it. It's much more deep than that. It could be kinky. It could be how you move in your relationship. It could be how you may or may not choose to parent or to develop family. It may be in how you choose to live your life. And all of those things are holy. And in any place where you are in the work of having to name that, there will be stigma to encounter because we're not cultured that way. And so for us to be able to have the holy work of holding space so that you can query the ways that are authentic to live fully embodied, I absolutely think that is what Jesus asked of us. And that is, for me, is what having life and life more abundantly is about, to live fully into my body and live into the abundance and the fullness that, you know, I know from having my whole self, having access to my whole self. And that's not to isolate the sex. That's not to isolate the ways I have sex. That's not to isolate those with whom I choose or choose not to. That's not to isolate going outside and walking and moving my body. That's not to isolate the ways that I eat. That's not to isolate the ways that I choose to grow my emotional capacity and to nurture my mental health, and to choose to make sure that I have a roof over my head in my professional life. All of these are ways where we have to consider our care and consider the holiness of holding and naming space for caring for our whole spirit, our whole person, and the whole being that was created in the divine genius.
Absolutely. I think, and that's also teaching the rest of our community, you know, within ourselves and our faith communities, what it means to live and to live abundantly. You know, what it is not is to live out loud and to live, you know, in spaces and places and to be liberated enough. You know, I think salvation is connected to healing and liberation, as opposed to you running down the aisle because you're afraid of dying or going to hell. I really believe that salvation is connected to the liberation, and salvation is connected to healing. And when you are healed and liberated, you make decisions for yourselves out of that abundance of that abundance and healing, right? And I think that, I think it's beneficial for the rest of the community. I think I've been in spaces and places where, you know, I was faced not overt aggression, but this microaggression, right? But you watch me move, right? You watch me move. It's like God is still doing God's business. God is still doing God is still working. I've heard all this rhetoric, I've heard all this programming, and yet this person is more operative in God than I have been programmed to believe. Because I understood the role, right? I understood, I've been in spaces and places where I don't show up as queer, I show up as African. And I say, if you're having a problem, the problem isn't you don't see me. The problem to me when I go into in certain spaces and places, it is that you're having some issues because you don't see Africa the way I see Africa, the way I engage in sacred memory, the way I understood my role as a gatekeeper. My role as a gatekeeper is really not to turn tables over loudly. It's really to walk into a space and hold the space until y'all children get it. What else? Yeah, go ahead.
I was waiting for the full pause that time. So it's all about timing. Just
we're good.
I didn't wait long enough the last time. I didn't wait long enough. That's the beauty of conversation. You just got to let it flow. What is coming up for me is the power of affirmation, the power of the repetition of language, right? So it's like there is a repetition of this you are bad, you're a wretched theology, right? That is repeated over and over and over again. And I, again, my vision, my hope is like, at what point do we, have a repetition of you are loved, you are divine, right? You are accepted exactly who you are. You are sacred, right? Because you entered this world as sacred, right? Pleasure is your divine birthright, right? These types of healing, liberation, African, womanist, right? Black, all of these things, right? How do we, those of us who are in various spaces, right, who have opportunity, whether we're leading liturgy or not, right, leading traditional faith spaces, or we just find ourselves in online spaces, right? I do a Thursday morning thing for my church, and I close it out the same way. You are loved. You have community here. If you're looking for a pastor, I'm happy to be that spiritual leader and that spiritual guide. This idea of like repetition, right, I think just really brings home the concepts that we're talking about, that when we see ourselves as divine and sacred, it gets hard to remember that when we are not consistently hearing the messages, whether we are saying them to ourselves, which we absolutely have to, right? I have to, let me just speak my truth. I have to, on a consistent basis, be reminded that I am called, I am divine, I am sacred, pleasure is my birthright, right? Like these are the things, right? I am womanish in all and most of my ways, right? Those kinds of things that are a reminder of like when I go out and do this work, right? Versus what are our faith communities hearing? What are the people who listen to us hearing? Even the people who just follow us on social media, how are we then, finding that repetition being a part of dismantling the ways that stigma is insidious. And much like white supremacy, it mutates, right? It finds ways to creep up and morph and form, right? Just the way white supremacy culture does, right? That we're all, like, regardless of our race, ethnicity, education, all of us, right? I got too many degrees, and I'm still complicit in white supremacist, capitalistic culture, right? And consistently unlearning, consistently reminding myself of who I am and who I come from, and where I come from. And that unlearning and relearning I do believe comes with the practice of repetition and affirmation, in a way that helps us. One of my personal mottos is that the dripping water smooths the rock. And I have to ask myself, how am I the drip? And in what ways am I the drip, right? And what is the rock that I'm seeking to smooth? And I do believe that that repetition of dripping comes with like the affirmations and the words that that I get to say.
What a statement. The dripping water smooths the rock. That's, I think, right. I think that's something that's consistent. That's something that's repetitive. That's something that moves and that happens. Absolutely. Anybody else got something to, add on to this conversation? This is a rich conversation. As I'm getting notes, this is a rich conversation, and no apology at all if certain words, no apology at all. You're gonna speak truth, right? You're gonna tell your story. I'm from, I'm a director of a 12-step spiritually based recovery group. And we say, it is what it is. Tell the story how it happened. Don't sugarcoat it. Just because you're in church, don't sugarcoat your story. People come in like, what? Y'all talk like that? Yes, because that's how it happened. That's exactly, I'm telling you how it happened. Why am I sugarcoating? Why am I sugarcoating this stuff, right? Why am I sugarcoating? Don't sugarcoat it. Be what it be, right? Be what it be. Tell your story. And I think that as I was talking to one of my colleagues, I was talking about Lil Nas X, and his particularly the video of Montero. I was looking at it like, oh, you sending him to hell, but you're mad because he's having a good time. But he does something we all don't do. He goes down there and beheads the devil while we're still running from him. Right? And so, it's just like, we're people who are survivors. We're people who have survived, right? We're people who have been to hell, fought with the devil, had got a round trip ticket back. Come on. We have a new space, a new life. And we're fighters. We've been fighting all our lives, right? And to a point where, particularly as we've become educated, particularly as we've had these experiences, particularly, I'm ready to, all I don't do is sometimes I'm ready to throw down. I'm just ready to throw down because we can't, y'all can either catch up or, I won't repeat what Dr. Jeremiah Wright said at the end of a plenary session, right? He's, he's had the benediction. He said, F him, and he didn't say F, he just, right. And so, right, because sometimes, listen, there's some people just not gonna get on board, you stay over there, you stay one-on-one people, you stay over there, and I'll take the 301s, I'll take the 301s. And that's how most of my experiences has been in the academy where I'm having these conversations, and I know how to do certain things and know how to say certain things within the academy. But sometimes when you're dealing with church, you just got, the adjustment has been an adjustment for me. It has been an adjustment, but nevertheless, it comes, you got to do the work that you have to do. You have to do the work you're called to do. And as I've learned about from Subunfu Some and my own initiation, because not only did I read Subunfu Some, I actually went through the initiation process to be the gatekeeper. And sometimes you just have to show up. And it isn't always about turning tables over. It's about showing up and continue to show up. As during a ritual, the conversation was, there was a young woman who was part of the ritual, and her job was to light the tea lights. Of course, we're outside, right? There's wind blowing, there's water dripping, there's all kind of stuff. And she says, she acknowledged that she was a gatekeeper. And somebody said, what's a gatekeeper? I don't know. All I know is I got to keep these tea lights lit. She said, all I know, my job is to keep the tea lights lit for everybody else, for the community. So I'm going to keep these tea lights lit. If they blow out, I'm going to light them back up again. So, that kind of thinking process, right? That kind of thinking process of us being these divine priests and priestesses who walk into spaces and places our communities aren't ready for, that we might not find out, we may not know the whole capacity of who we are, but at the same time still show up. Still show up.
So I love that you brought up the imagery in Montero from Little Nas X, because it actually really connects to what Reverend Dr. Lissette was saying, and how it landed for me. So what it reminded me of, and I also think this speaks to similar to what Reverend Perry was saying earlier, what it reminded me of is to remember who the enemy is, right? And as you were talking with it, that was the thing that just kind of kept coming up to me, because part of the reason why I love doing the work that I do, and I've been doing this work a long time. I started undergrad working with Black women and HIV, because the enemy isn't your embedded theology. The enemy is the white supremacy that you've internalized, right?
Wow,
and so
yes.
I can hold space for you as you have to learn to fight the enemy, and I can fight the enemy with you. And so even when it feels like you're fighting me, which is why we got to have ground rules, right? Because I got to have boundaries and I'm a human. But even when you are fighting me, I know it's not you. That's when you try the spirit by the spirit. I'm fighting the enemy that's in you, even when you've internalized it and taken it in and called it God, right? Because this work is to exorcise the enemy, right? And any sister, sibling, brother, human being that I have that is queer and can look at me and tell me it's not good, I can help them hold space to exorcise the enemy, right? And so there are times where we need to be able to do that one-on-one work. Like I mentioned, starting with Black women in condom negotiation. You know what I'm saying? That's not a queer conversation. That's a Black woman conversation. Our ability to negotiate what happens in our sexual spaces and what we need to do to protect ourselves, and how we do or do not feel like we have the ability to have the conversations that we need, even if we know that it will save our lives, right? HIV is preventable completely, but it's because we've internalized the stigma first. So sometimes for me, right, in my ethic around this, in my womanish ethic around this, before I'm as concerned about, the external view of the stigma, I'm always interested and invested in how I can heal a person's own internalized stigma, because that's where the enemy is. That's the devil whose head we got to cut off. And it's in them even when they're coming at us, right? Now you have to have training, you have to have bandwidth, you have to have some spiritual tools, you got to have some cleansing tools so you can leave that enemy at their house and it don't come home with you, right? It's a whole lot. You can't just get up and go think you're gonna be slaying no head, right? But come in here, somebody, right? That and you have to have the call for it. You have to be able to hold the mantle that it requires to do that, if we're gonna talk churchy, right? But you have to also be clear that that's the work that you're doing. And that's what I hear you saying, Dr. Mike, is that clarity. Really, it's the clarity. That's what I heard you say in that statement. It's being clear about what you're doing. And so for some of us, we do need to be able to just hold space and keep tea lights lit. For some of us, we might be running a ritual. For some of us, all we need to do is say, my uncle been gay and he don't believe it. And so I'm going to just take him where I know they talking about it, right? For some of us, it's just being willing to exorcise, like the word I said earlier that I got called when I cut my hair off, to just remove it from our language and from our lexicon, right? But there's a way that we all have a role in this work, and we all have a part in doing it. You just have to know that the enemy ain't each other. The enemy ain't our siblings, it's not our family. That's not the enemy. And the enemy also ain't the ones who might still say homosexual, right? Because if that's where you are, then let me help you exercise.
Yeah, the real thing that we need to be calling for deliverance from is not our homosexuality, but rather the deliverance from the inability to live in truth.
Yes, for all of us to live in right, for all of us to live in some kind of truth. And I think that I think we redirect the fact that You triggered me, Reverend Esty, because it goes back to Baby Shug, right? It goes back to Baby Shug and Beloved, right? Right. Come, y'all need to come on and inject. Y'all unmute because I don't want to be here by myself. Right. Unmute.
No, we doing all this amening. We just here.
Yes. You're doing it right because she clearly, Baby Shark clearly said she clearly identified who the enemy was.
Yes.
She
Over
clearly
yonder,
identified who the enemy was.
Yeah.
Up and yonder, they don't love us.
They don't love us.
They don't.
Yeah.
They still don't love us. Baby
Yes.
Shark was right. They still don't love us.
Yes.
Ain't nobody asked that
It's
shooter
different.
in Buffalo. Didn't anybody ask the religious background? He didn't ask anybody's sexual background. He didn't ask anybody's faith background. It was the common denominator was like they still don't love us. So we have a common enemy. In this fact that we have a common enemy, we all need to stick. We all need to get our roles and come together and get our roles because at the end of the day, they are still plotting and planning. He's just another one that got through. But they're still plotting and planning. We were worried about, if you worried about somebody drinking, somebody sexing, somebody, you done missed the point. The point is we have a common enemy. And we need to be like Little Nas, go into the depths of hell and cut off the head.
Yeah.
Some of us ain't gotta go
First of
nowhere.
all, do the lap dance first. You gotta do the lap dance first. You gotta do the lap dance first. Don't tell the people to go to the head. You gotta do the lap dance first now, Dr. Mike. Tell the people
because
if they gonna do
you gotta
it.
entice them. Because
Lap dance
you
first.
coming to kill me. If I know you come to kill me, I can be ready. So you like, this is getting
But some
gooder
of
and
us ain't
gooder and
got to
gooder.
go nowhere to get to hell. Some of us ain't got to go nowhere.
See there, right there.
Right.
We don't have to travel. Nas went down the stripper pole, right?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Which is
Yes,
holy.
he did.
Let's say that.
Yes,
right?
yes, he did.
Let's
Oh
say
yeah.
that. It is holy. But he did travel. And
Yes, he did.
and for some of us, we wake up and invite
Right.
hell.
We ain't got to go nowhere. It's right there on the outside of the door.
When you were talking, it reminded me of the scripture, right? For we wrestle not against flesh and blood,
Right.
but against principalities,
Principalities.
powers, and the rulers of darkness. And all of this, right, includes the anti-LGBTQ, right? Includes the white supremacy. This is what we're really wrestling with. Yeah.
Yes. Let's all come together and get the bigger picture. Let's
The
have these
rulers of
conversations.
darkness.
Right. The rulers of darkness. Let's all come together and have this bigger picture because it ain't, it ain't over. We do have, as what we said, we have a common enemy.
Yeah.
All hands on deck, just like the Haitian Revolution. All hands were on deck. Ain't nobody said you can't do this. You can't. All hands on deck. All spiritual practices.
Yes.
Listen.
Yeah, voodoo doesn't become a problem until after the French lost the revolution.
Of course.
Tell the
Let's
history.
have that conversation.
You want to know why? Because it worked.
Right.
That's
because
the thing.
It worked.
It's not even what they were doing. It's because it worked.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the thing that we have to remember about even the stigma that we experience. Sex is a huge stigma because it works. When you have access to your power through your pleasure, you're going to walk around here in a different kind of way. You're going to move and do some things in a different kind of way. How you function, how you stand, as my grandma would say, flat-footed, right? And unapologetic is going to look real different when you have coalesced all of the parts of your being and you live in whole.
Yeah.
Being whole.
And that's what song The Blood Still Works just came to me. And I'm not a singer. I know how to make a joyful noise, but the lyrics just said it still works. The blood still works. It works. Listen, and we can substitute blood with some other things. Orgasms still work. I'm just saying. I'm just repeating what Reverend. What is being. It still works. It still works.
It still works. All orgasms still work.
It's scripture.
It works.
It's biblical.
The ritual works.
It's biblical. It's right. It's ritual.
Yeah.
Orgasms still work.
And it's holy.
And it's
And
right.
worship in a way.
First of all, hold on. Right.
We have to like really
Yes.
change our language around this, even not just and including the gay sex itself, right? Like the LGBTQ sex itself.
Ain't none of us said "old devil" at the moment.
I don't know nobody.
I
I
don't
ain't
know
heard no,
nobody.
not
I ain't never been
anecdote.
with nobody.
Not even in the erotica. Ain't
Right.
nobody writing erotica where the climax, where the characters are saying, "Oh,
yeah, because you call it what you see.
Huh?
You call him. You call it.
You
what
name
you
it.
see.
You naming the truth.
Huh?
Right. Right.
Right.
See, Dr. Lissette used the proper word. I was going to use the other term, but you're right. We're both the same thing. Ain't nobody scripted saying, "Oh devil, oh Satan." They're all saying, "Oh God," at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And I know somebody watching is like, this conversation has gone off, but let me help you.
People are screaming.
Part
people are
of breaking
screaming.
down stigma is the boldness of speaking truth. And if our
Right.
Black faith communities can speak truth, allow
Right.
our Black queer siblings, allow our Black trans non-binary folks to speak truth, then we consistently can be the drips, right? That erases stigma, because that is part of speaking truth. The lived experience, embodied truth that at least the four of us on this screen right now, and all of the people that are saying amen watching this, know what it means to feel to see life better after a good orgasm. I don't know about you, but I see life better after
Listen.
Clarity
Listen.
of thought. Huh?
Listen.
Now there's a clarity.
That's a clear thought.
And
Listen.
it's holy. Do you hear me?
Listen.
It is
You know,
holy.
there's the "oh God" experience, and then there's the "praise God" experience. You can have an "oh God." You all can have an "oh God" experience, but when you have that "praise God" experience,
Yes,
let
you be
me
grateful.
tell
You be
you.
thankful.
Absolutely.
When you like,
going
eyes
to
have
worship.
not seen, the ears have not heard of the glory.
What's it? I'm Baptist Costal, Reverend Terry. So you know that just I can't sing, y'all. I can't sing, but y'all know.
Pick me up.
Listen.
10 minutes later, the other party come out of the shower and they're like, "What's going on?" I was like,
I'm in worship.
Listen,
What you gonna do?
a spiritual inhabitation. Listen.
Yes.
As the people would say about church, throw your weight around.
listen, there's some people on this call that's like, "Oh my God."
I'm done.
But it's about speaking truth. It's about speaking truth to power. It's like removing the stigmatization that, let's like you ain't the only one saying, "Oh God." Come on.
And if I may, it's naming what has always been known in private and public.
Yes.
Because there's a reason why this has happened so much privately. It wasn't because of sin, it was because of pleasure.
Yes.
And identity. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I think that's biblical too, right? Because if we think about even the narratives that we have in the text, right? And often they even talk about knowing, right?
Right.
So and so went in with so and so, and she knew him, right? And so the ways that we discuss it now is a reflection culturally of how we have this implication of the knowing. That's what the clarity is. It's a knowing. It's a knowing. It's an awakening. It's an experience that we get to have. And so while it is fun and light, it's important, I think, for us to be able to create space to know that we can be very serious about this work, but it's also who we have come to be. Yeah. Because we believe in the transformative power of undoing the stigma, of knowing the enemy and being willing to cut off the head of the implications of white supremacy and colonization on our bodies, our sexualities, our pleasures, and our communities, right? And that allows us as queer embodied folks, as allies of queer folks, as those invested in the work, to free us and to liberate us anti-queer theological practices, that it really comes in us being able to know the self and to live the divine self wholly and fully. Yeah.
Amen.
I see applauses, all the comments.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing I want to add to that
Go ahead, right.
is to also make room for it to be processed, right?
Right.
To be processed. And so if you're listening and some of this feels extreme or it feels overwhelming or you tempted to cut us off, right? Just come back, right? That's all I'm gonna say is come back and play it and listen again, because I don't think there's a person on this call that the first time we began to wrestle, we didn't need to come again. We need to stop and revisit, you know what I'm saying? Even with ourselves and in our own experiences, that is human, that is normal, and to be in process is actually a sacred way to know that you're really engaging the work, to know that you're really engaging the work that your spirit would have you to do for your own growth and elevation. And that process is as holy as being is.
Amen.
Amen.
I think that's so important because I believe part of what we are doing, what we are modeling is this tearing down of cultural practices where the lay people or the people in the pews esteem the ministers, the pastors, the clergy in ways, and then therefore that constructs this false sense of behavior and activity because you are supposed to act this way and we're supposed to be watching you to model after that, right? And so what does it mean to also name that you are also seeing the glory of God's healing work, right? Of the divine, of the ancestors of spirit in us, because you don't know where we came from. You don't know our story, right? What you see is this moment here, right? I mean, I still believe it's in therapy, right? Like I got a routine schedule with my therapist.
Do you hear me every Monday?
Come on. So don't let the smooth taste fool you, right? All of us had to do exactly what Reverend Ia said, which is sometimes you got to turn it off. Sometimes you cannot drink from from a fire hose, right? And sometimes it can feel like that, and it is okay to siphon it off, to take a step back, to understand that there is some healing, right? That you may be doing. And there may be some activation that's happening, listening to us, seeing our embodiment, watching our responses, and also accept that as healing, right? I believe part of my coming into my queerness or coming into my woman loving self at 30 was the idea that I was in woman loving space, right? Same gender woman loving space, and could just be around them and see that it was good and see that God still moved, and then therefore could do my process, right? So sometimes the watching of this, the putting this on in the background is to see what is yet possible for you, for your community, for, what it is that may the waters that might be troubled in your soul by this, because I do believe that we become what we are able to see and what we're able to be in community, who we're able to be in community with.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's 8:20 is the hour that we're here. I think we've been having a really good time. And I was like, there was a shift in the conversation. There was a shift in the conversation, and we all rode with the shift in the conversation, right? We engaged in the shift, and I think for those who are watching this program, who have comments or have questions, I think it also opens doors. I hope it will open doors and gateways for them to say, "Oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, really? Oh, and to see the humanity and the divinity." And the blackness and the queerness and all this entire package, right? This entire package as whole and as still divine, divine presence. We are divine. We've been divine whether we walk down the aisle at the church or not. We're divine. We're born divine. We're created divine. The power is within us. The divinity is within us. We are a product of the divine.
Period.
Period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Period. That's it.
Right. That's that on that.
That's that on that, right? That's that on right.
I love it.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah.
Divine.
Yeah. And I ain't gonna argue with you.
Right.
That part.
That part,
Okay.
right?
Right.
Okay.
My grandma would say, "You is what you is." Yeah.
It's going
So even if you don't believe it, let me help you.
right.
I know it. Yeah.
It is what it is. Right.
It is what it
It-
is. You divine.
It is what
Yeah.
it is. You is what you is. That's it.
Yeah, you is what you is.
Mhm.
And I'm not arguing. I'm not.
And I'm not
arguing
arguing
with
with
you.
you
No,
about
I'm not
that.
gonna argue. No, no,
I'm not arguing
listen.
with you.
I ain't got no tip for
Listen,
that.
I've come this
No
far.
two for one.
I've come this far. I've come this far by faith. And you're gonna try to tell me what?
Mhm.
What? No, we're not having that conversation.
You don't
No,
know my
I-
late in the midnight hour. You don't.
Right, you don't know my midnight hours. You don't know the lateness. You don't know the
Listen.
dark conversations. You don't know the compromise and the conversations I've had. You don't know about the what I think one of my talk about as a future RTT is about the suicidal tendencies, whether it is voluntary or involuntary, right? Because behavioral things that there's involuntary suicidal behaviors and suicidal thoughts that our community has faced because of this devil of white supremacy, because that's what it is, right? It's the devil of white supremacy, trying to confine and trying to mold everybody into this robot, this package, right?
Because really, in order to do this for the self, certainly to do it for the community, you have to do it for the self.
Yes.
You have to, because we couldn't be able to hold space and still be here and be sane if we hadn't done it for ourselves. But in order to do it for the self, it's a shift in consciousness, really.
Yeah.
And you cannot change your consciousness without first trying to compromise, because that's what is human to do. You rather take yourself out. You rather compromise you than go through the discomfort and the pain to change your consciousness. Because it is that difficult. You understand? It's that difficult and it's that primary. Think about it, because we've all done it. I know human process enough to know that that's true. You do not change your consciousness without first attempting compromise. Because I'd rather trade, I'd rather bargain, I'd rather, rob Peter to pay Paul. I'd rather have a piece of wholeness so that I can have a piece of sleep, right? And still go to my mama's house and not have to tell her that, the things that I do in the midnight hour that make me happy in the morning, right? We would rather, it's human.
Yeah.
We would rather compromise. We would rather portion ourselves out. We would rather do that than to change our consciousness, because it hurts, because it's difficult, because it requires a dismantling of the self, and then you got to look at pieces first. That's the part people don't talk about. That's the part that's not cute, right? You got to sit around, you got to take all of that apart and then look at all these puzzle pieces and figure out what you're supposed to do with them. Because it doesn't come, the reconstruction of the self in healing doesn't come with the manual either.
My God,
to tell you,
come on.
This piece goes with that piece. And what's missing for your spirit is really water ritual. Ain't nobody gonna tell you, because can't nobody tell you that what you really need for your mental health is Wellbutrin. Ain't nobody gonna tell you, because can't nobody tell you that what you really need for your sexual pleasure is masturbation. Ain't nobody gonna tell you, because they can't tell you that the thing that you actually need to be able to see your blind spot and to know your ugliness is community to tell you the truth, right? It's difficult to dismantle the self, and we would rather compromise. Of course we would. Because it's human. It's human. No one has changed their consciousness without compromising themselves first.
Wow.
Let the church say amen. Let the
I'm
people.
done.
Let the people.
I'm done. I'm done. This is a whole nother conversation. This is a whole nother
There's nothing else to say.
There's nothing else to say.
And
after
they
that.
sang a hymn and went out.
And
Right.
thank
And
you,
here's the
Reverend
benediction
Perry.
and
And
the
they
hymn.
sang a hymn and went out. What in the world? There is nothing. Drop mic,
Because
mic
it's
drop, done.
human.
I'm just.
I'm gonna sit with that all night long. I'm gonna sit with that all night long because I never
So
thought,
thank God.
thought that. I thought there was something wrong with me, but it's something right about me.
It's something
because
human about you.
It's something
Human.
Human.
Hmm.
It's not wrong or right. It's human.
I hope you wrote that somewhere.
Yeah,
Is there an article? Was it? You need to write an article on that.
Girl, the Holy Ghost.
That was the Holy Ghost.
When you need to go back and watch this part, and then just go ahead and let all of the Orisha, let
be
your
no
people,
time, right?
let the spirit, let them come through the pen, and then give it to us. We gonna give you proper attribution. We gonna cite you right.
Because I gotta watch this again. Because I'm writing everything down.
That is
woman out here trying to start a business. Please cite me. You know what I'm saying?
we gonna cite you.
I'm citing.
And we gonna share the link properly. We're gonna cite you because that is that in all of the work, right, that I've done and all of the education and all of the research, I have not read an articulation that you just made.
Right.
Oh,
particularly on the reconstruction work. So even it is my tendency to help folks come back to why we're talking about stigmatization, because part of breaking stigma down is reconstruction. You can't break stigma down if you don't have a new story, a new narrative. And part of that is the reconstruction work. And that is human.
But you can't reconstruct until you deconstruct. And I'm saying that before the deconstruction comes the compromise.
Yeah.
Because you really don't want to do.
Because nobody wants to do that.
Nobody
wants to do that. You know, like one of the hardest things I think about being queer is that I always have to come out, right? It's like every time I go somewhere new, every time and I think different people experience it differently, right? And some people be like, I ain't gonna name it, they'll figure it out when I show it with my wife or whatever, right? But you know, and I think that's fine, right? But for me, I just who I am, I tend to name things. It's just who I am. And so like, but always having to like be aware that like, oh, right, I'm gonna see my cousin I ain't seen in 15 years. I got a name that, you know, when I say spouse, I'm not talking about a man, right? Or whatever the case is, right? That when I say partner, I actually mean partner, and I'm not just being progressive, right?
You know what?
Which is
the shade.
But I mean,
somebody missed the shade, but there you go.
To name and have clarity, right? Yeah. And so I think that's the part that like has to be acknowledged is like that compromise is because to the awareness of like I'm gonna always have to do this. I'm going to always I have to really heal this pain because I'm gonna rub up against it every day, right? And that's the thing that often will leap a person, will be the launching pad for a person to go further. But there are people who don't jump. And that's okay because it's human, right? Because that compromise, it's just a human thing. So the compromise is first, then the deconstruction, and that deconstruction process. And you should have a guide, right? You should have a spiritual guide. You should have a therapist. And I mean spiritual guide. I don't necessarily mean a pastor. It could be a pastor, but you know, right. Different pastors have different gifts, right? So you need a spiritual guide. You probably need a ritualist because ritual supports healing process, right? You need you generally need some kind of medical guide, right? Because we need good blood pressure and a good sex life, right? Right. Yeah. It's all of these things that we have to realign, right? In that deconstruction process. But the real truth about what works and what makes you you and what makes you tick and why this thing brings you pleasure and the other thing doesn't, and why this thing that's between you and your spirit.
Yes.
Can't nobody be there with you in that but you. That's between you and your path and your destiny. God's self is a witness and a co-creator of you.
Yes.
So to shift your consciousness, to change your consciousness, to be able to deconstruct that stigma in your consciousness, you're gonna compromise first. That's all right, because you can also deconstruct, take all of those pieces, and really create the magnificent genius, immaculate holy being that you always were. Because it's also human to have to do that process. Everybody has to do it.
Yep. Amen.
That is what it is to be in the human experience. And God is God enough to give us space to be fully in this human experience.
Yes. Amen.
Amen. Ashe.
Ashe.
All of that. I mean, a woman. All of that.
Ashe.
Everybody.
This is when I know that the Lord intentionally did not give me the gift to sing. You know, this is how I know. There's just moments, Reverend Perry, where you just know that the Lord was like,
break out?
you can't handle the
You can't
gift.
have that
You
one.
ain't gonna be a good steward of his gift. This is why I cannot sing. I will go with that belief until the day I meet my maker. Because if I could belt out a hymn right now or a song right now, child, I would be no more good. This is why I don't have a gift.
Just out. Just out.
Listen.
Well, you know what? We are now at the 8:35 hour. At the 8:35 hour, we had a really good conversation. I could see this continuing the conversation in a whole different way, in a whole different level, because we got real loose, it got real loosey-goosey, it got real true, we got real free, we got real
spiritual,
free. We got real free.
We were loose, we were
loose, everything.
God met us here.
Yes, God.
The divine did. Yes, she did.
God really did.
The divine said, Larisha said, why y'all being so nice? Yo, just come on, say it. Just come on, do what you got to do. You know, I know y'all, just, you know, I think that, and this is I see comments, this is everything, you know, it's really great. And so we're at the end of our session. We definitely have to have a part 2 in this conversation, all parties and maybe somebody else. Rainbow Table Talk has taken a life of its own, has been taking a life of its own, and is continuing to do so. And I am certainly proud of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference to create this platform for Rainbow Table Talk and to work with, and to be serious about working with LGBTQIA people, parishioners and lay leaders and clergy, and acknowledging and hearing their voices and moving forward, and not just doing proclamation, but the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference is doing work, is doing some work in this area. And I appreciate their gifts, and I appreciate the leadership of Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright and Reverend Dr. Frederick D. Haynes III. Oh yeah, Freddie. And Dr. Iva Carruthers, Mama Carruthers, yes, for all of their leadership and opening the space and opening up the doors so we could have these kind of conversations. And I said, and then to also want to thank Reverend Jerry Wright, my sister from another mother. I love her dearly. I met her in the flesh for the first time in April, and it was just a Holy Ghost moment out in the bright sun and 80-degree weather. So we're going to thank everybody. Want to thank everybody for attending this table talk. It was a rich conversation. I love every single one of you for joining this conversation. And we will have another conversation. We're definitely going to have another conversation, a continued conversation around this topic. And that's it. For all those who are watching us, we wish you well. Blessings upon blessings upon blessings. May the God, and big hugs. We love you. And don't let anybody steal your joy. Keep it moving. Enjoy life. Live life abundantly. And if you're experiencing a shift, walk with it. Just walk with the shift. Just walk with it. Walk with it. Take care. God bless. See you again next time. It's still good. It was still good. I don't want to watch it again. It was still good. Oh my God, it was still good.
So many nuggets,
Yes.
That's right.
so much laughter and joy. It was good.
Spirit filled, yes. Spirit filled, moving in truth. And
Yes.
standing in truth and operating in truth, yes. Oh my God, yes. I think we're having so I'm waiting for, waiting for a programmers to switch over to questions in the chat.
Questions are in the chat.
Okay. I know, but can the panelists speak to their concerns regarding public policies that are damaging to the LGBTQ community that are not supported by many Black religious groups, but BLM is proclaimed? This is from Sabrina Dent from IG. You want to read the second question, Jay? Or
Are we going to answer this? I mean, it's a big question.
it's a big question.
It's a big question. I think part of answering the question is the focus of tonight's Rainbow Table Talk, eradicating stigmatization. That if I'm stigmatizing someone's humanity, it becomes harder and harder for me to vote or support legislation or call my elected officials to pass legislation that affirms the humanity of all people. And so I think that to proclaim Black Lives Matter can be an entry, but to help our Black faith communities go deeper, and our Black religious groups to go deeper in advocacy, and then following through with holding our elected officials accountable and pushing forward human-centered, life-sustaining legislation that protects the basic rights of living, of making a living, earning a wage, to live safe on the streets of whatever city, town, municipality they find themselves in, to not be harassed by the public officials or the people that are supported by the state to protect us. I believe it begins with this consistent conversation of eradicating stigma, because until I see you as my sibling, as a fellow human being made in the image of the divine, it becomes harder for me to actually see how life-sustaining public policy as passed through legislation goes to shore up your humanity collectively, because your issue is my issue. And until we can get to that point, it will, I believe there will be a bit of a chasm between how we can shout Black Lives Matter, but not always see the need to pass anti-discrimination legislation that protects people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and even to some extent, gender expression.
Yes. I think these don't say gay, these anti-trans youth bills, I think they're going. Yes, one young man who's on Good Morning America, he says, and even though he was in high school, he just couldn't say the word, he was the valedictorian, he couldn't say the word gay. And he said, he argued that even though that Don't Say Gay was geared towards the kindergarten and first grade or something like that, he said the language is going to expand. The rhetoric is going to expand. So you see this pushback from the state legislatures that they're trying to get around certain things. And one of these things is the Don't Say Gay policies, or going after parents of trans children. That begins that pushback on these states who've been pushing back on, you have to look at it, the same states pushing back on abortion
Because the same states are going to push back on the anti-gay, don't say gay, and legislation about trans children. I think you see any state that's doing that, you see the same. You start seeing that pattern, and we have this threat of Roe versus Wade being pushed back, and you know what's coming next. I mean, Justice Clarence Thomas already said that the court made a mistake when they approved same-sex marriage. So, you know, how long has we had same-sex marriage? And it's still on his head, still on his mind. That's a problem. And I think we have to get our communities together, because the same people that are pro-gun, the same people who are pro anti-gun control laws, and the same people who are the same people who are voter suppression. So, like I said, when we said in the program, we have to look at the common enemy. The common enemy, if you look all these lists, what the common enemy is against on that list is all of us. So we have to hold accountable our communities to look at the entire list and to push back on and to hold our elected officials accountable. Next question. Love the sin or hate the sin has been one of the most harmful positions from the church and still is employed today. That is like 101, 001, 001 work, not even 101. Love to hear the panelists respond to this in 2022. So love the sin, hate the sin is not even 101. Reverend Esty, it is 001.
Listen.
We're not even getting to 101. That's 001.
It's the pre-work before the beginning.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's pre-K.
In fact, it is. So what's the question?
Love the sin or hate the sin has been one of the most harmful positions from the church and still is employed today. That is like, so how do we respond to that? I guess the statement is, how do we respond to how do we respond? You talk about 101, 201, and 301, but this is 001, right? And this person's lens, this is 001. How do we respond to this? Like we're having this conversation in 2022.
Yeah. For me, I think response has to be a personal boundary. Honestly, how is it healthy for you in this moment? And what that may be today may not be what it is tomorrow. And I think that that's okay. But I think how I generally respond is I'm not interested in having conversation with people who aren't invested in the conversation itself. And so with kind of quips of that nature, I generally find that folks are just committed to wherever they are and not necessarily in the conversation. So I generally don't have a response for that. If I am going to respond to something like that, I support starting with just raising awareness about how that impacts the person. So, hey, if you think about it from a different perspective, if you were born as a Black person and somebody said that being Black is a sin, but we hate the sin, we hate your skin, but not you, how do you separate those things?
Right.
And so sometimes that can open a door for a different level of investment. But I think sometimes if you're in that place, then I'm okay with allowing you to be wherever you need to be at the time. And knowing that responses have to be healthy. And I think sometimes we can want to be apologetics. I'm not a Christian apologetic. I'm not a gay apologetic. I'm not a African traditional apologetic. Like, I'm not invested. And, a whole other conversation of why or how do these things, because I think while it's important work, there is a way, to the point of it being like 001, there is a way that you have to just want it. You have to really want to move and to move the needle of your own awareness and theological conceptions. And I think that is demonstrated in other ways, from just kind of quickly responding with clips that we know are harmful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the perfect lens. And yeah, like I said, it was mentioned, and somebody mentioned it, and like you said earlier during the workshop, during our table talk, that I'm losing my train of thought. I'm facing the street and I'm seeing lightning. Not a good thing.
No.
Yeah. So what was I thinking? The love the sin, hate the sin. I mean, they were after the Bible study. There were certain conversations of how people were impacted by the statement, right? And there were some people who were like, well, the person was basically saying, love the sin, hate the sinner. Love the sin. Love that sinner, hate the sin. And it's cheap. It's cheap grace, and I don't want it. It's problematic, and I don't want it. And you're right. Let's turn the tables. What does that look like for you to be accepted one way and not another way, or there's something about your blackness that's problematic for the entire system of the conversation. How do we move that label? How do we shift gears to highlight what that statement actually means and how it's perceived? It's empty. It's an empty statement. My question is, how did you feel about the workshop? Unless you want to say something yourself.
No, it never ceases to amaze me that people still believe in love the sinner and hate the sin, or hate the sin, love the sinner, however it goes.
I get it confused too because
I never say it right either. That could be because of the work, right? But I think I also want to affirm those whose spirits are disrupted by that consistent mindset to maybe question, is that your call? Is maybe you're the one that the divine is inviting to develop talking circles and healing spaces and those kinds of things to work with the 001 folks, because as mentioned on Rainbow Table Talk, I do believe we all have a skill. And so we listen to what Reverend Esty says, and she's like, this is a matter of boundaries for some of us, right? And that is okay. And then there are some of us whose heart are like, but we don't want those people to be left behind, or we don't want them to feel like they are then on the outskirts. And I just believe that people have a heart for those folks. People have the patience, right? People are clear about how to sit with them in ways that are transformative and are generative, that maybe others of us are like, I'm protecting my peace, or this is not the conversation I want to have, or all of the beautiful examples that Reverend Esty already mentioned on ways that some of us can respond. But if you are someone and you really have a heart for that, then maybe the next conversation with God, with the divine, with spirit, ancestors is, how do I reach these people? Because they still exist. They still here. They producing new ones. I mean, the mindset's not easily dying off, right? And so it causes me to think, okay, then if you feel concerned about it, maybe this is your work.
Mm-hmm.
And that is good, because we need you.
I'll be honest, not mine. It's not my call.
Mine either.
I don't know.
But there is a role for, I think somebody said there's a role for everybody to play.
There's a role for everybody.
Everybody has a role to play.
Yeah, the 001s, give me 201s. I can't, that's I know, man, I know limitations. A man and a person are another limitations. That's
Yeah,
also,
I think for me, if I'm for 001, I'd rather take a person who is also in the lived experience of being queer, because there are those.
right.
And so I would say those would be my 001 folks. But I agree, Dr. Lissette, that certainly we all have a space. And I'm not saying it's not important work.
Right.
I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, I think that even amongst Black folks, we can sometimes discount the emotional, spiritual labor that it requires to do things that for another person may seem or are assumed simple, or to have low impact. And I think part of us humanizing the experience is telling the truth about that whole experience, right? And so it's and so I think that we have to also be willing to name what language does. And I think that's a huge part of the stigma too, that we didn't have the opportunity to get to in this particular RTT, but Dr. Mike says it's gonna be another one. But language
Oh, definitely, yes.
is a so we can deal with that honestly, because it but language is really critical. And I do think that there's opportunity and material for us to know that that's harmful language. And I think that in doing this anti-stigma work, it's also important for us to know that everybody has agency, including those who are on the other side. That's all.
Yeah,
Amen.
I think that's, I think that it lightens, it's a way to bridge, right? And I think it's a way to bridge that space and to go to, in other words, to bring everybody together to a certain aspect, not on the same necessarily the same page, but to have this understanding, right? To see that even though that person is saying something, that if I'm going to be divine, and I have the divinity in me, they have to have some divinity. They have to have some divinity in them originally, right? Where we talked about that, we have to extend that same divinity, then that same level of understanding, right? To say that this is really great, but it is that we have to look at our language and how harmful it is, and who constructed that language. And there was a comment, segue into, there was a comment on IG. One person said that they don't consider themselves, they hate the word queer, they think it's, it's a white social construct. I will speak from my own experience that I also think, I don't know how old the person is, I think it's also generational, because I was in that boat too. I hated the word queer, but it wasn't until last June that I realized the younger generation were using it. And if I wanted to speak to everybody, then I felt I had to be interchangeable with all the language that's in our community. Right or wrong, it's just, I wanted to connect with everybody in that community. So there are younger generations who don't have a problem with the word queer. But there's somebody in my age bracket would have a problem with the word queer. So I'm trying to, and this is our last comment, and it's our last section. What do you think about how do we respond to that person using using the word queer, how to respond to the person who was just, off put by the word queer, who is gay, right?
Yeah. I think agency and grace have to work hand in hand. That we have the power of naming ourselves. We have the power to accept names that resonate for our internal sense of identity, how we feel called, how we move in the world, what just feels good to, to our souls. And then I agree with you, Dr. Mike, that it is generational, that the power of naming also extends to younger generations. It equally, as someone maybe an individual of a particular age or time that's like, I have harmful associations with this term, I can't use it for myself. Okay, there are others of us who have gone through our process, and the naming for us resonates. And I believe part of eradicating stigma is also learning or at least embracing a love ethic that allows us to be in community together, to honor how we name ourselves, and to say that that is good. That the person who says, I am a gay Black woman and I do not use queer, is as good as my non-binary sibling saying I am non-binary, or my queer, gender queer, friend or colleague saying I'm queer. That is good as well, and we can still be in beloved community together.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think that part of the ethic of what we have to do in healing stigma is really invest in the power of being able to name and create space for ourselves. And I think as African diasporan folks, that is very innate to who we are. It is a way of being in the world that is very natural to who we are as just created beings, as children of the diaspora. And so I really love that. And I think it too could be even regional. I'm in my 30s, and when I came out and I was making all the phone calls, I literally sat on my floor in my bedroom and called a whole gang of folks. And a couple people was like, I can't call you no queer, and I was in my 20s when this happens. So I think it's regional too, because they were like, I'm not calling you that. Like, and not people who had a problem with it, and so I then had to have some conversations. Say it's fine if you don't want to say that. I'm okay with all of it. You can call me whatever you want to, as long as it's something that's honorable. But that's my way of creating space for myself, because most of it fits. so I'm good with it, right? But my point is that for me, I like queer because it's subversive. But I'm also of the generation where we use the N-word and we subvert it, right? So while I'm not gonna say that on this broadcast, I have space. It's not a word I use a lot, but I do have space and context where that has subversive power. And I think there are other words that have subversive power. And contextually, it's really important. I also like queer because of the actual definition. And for me, as a person who has multiple identities amongst queer folks in the umbrella, beyond just the sexualities. As that person, for me, queer literally allowed me to question and to come into the space and have an opportunity to be curious with myself. And so for me, queer was where I started. And I was even careful to name that, because I think it does come with an experience. I think you have to be also honoring of, like, if you're not actually queer, don't be out here just be like, well, I'm interested, so I'm queer. Right. So there's a whole other thing there. But that matters. I wasn't that person. But once I was clear that, okay, this is a set of identities where I fall somewhere, it gave me space to really find a place to land, and to do that in a way that was intentional and sacred and authentic. And I haven't experienced another label or name that is common that gave me the same expansiveness. But I think if it doesn't fit, I'm fine with that. We don't need. It don't have to. I am you. More than yes. Everybody's welcome at the cookout. Just come on. Mm-hmm. That's my answer. Women loving women, same gender loving, lesbian, gay, pansexual, bisexual. Transgender, queer, I don't have a label. Yeah, I just love
pre-op, pre-post-op, no op, pre-op, post-op.
We need more cups. Can you get some more cups?
The cup we can all drink from. Hello, how about that? The cup we can all drink from. Yeah. The cup we can all drink from. All righty, it's almost the 9 o'clock hour, and there are no more questions or comments that I could see. So again, thank you for everybody joining in the calls and asking questions. And this will be circulating around YouTube and Facebook and other people will see it, and then we can start working on, get to work on, well, think about hosting another RTT, because I think we should close out the month with an RTT session, because I think it was a rich conversation, and I think the most important thing talk about, one of the things that struck me in the conversation was deconstruction, because there's a lot of talk about decolonizing Christianity, decolonizing this, but we're not taking into consideration what that actually looks like. Like I've said a number of times, that God is on the other side of our broken chains. We just have to learn. We have to identify the chains that are holding us down, and some of them have looked really good. And some of them have looked Christian, have appeared as Christian, and they're not. And so, what does that look like? What does God look like on the other side of the broken? And can we trust the process enough to see God on the other side of our broken chains?
Absolutely.
So that sounds like a topic, doesn't it?
This sounds like another great conversation.
That sounds like a topic. That sounds like a conversation.
It's a topic.
God is on the other side
It's
of our
a topic.
broken chains. That's not a
Yes.
conversation. I know.
Deconstruction.
Deconstruction. So thank you all.
Yeah.
Julie is our host.